I'm doing what I'm doing now to do everything I can possibly do to reach back in time 22, 23 years ago and help the somewhat clueless, somewhat lost, somewhat struggling people who are trying to figure out this whole marketing, sales, and business growth thing. Went out on my own, January of 2002. I had no idea about getting clients. I had no idea about marketing, sales, nothing. I struggled mightily.
As you've heard me say before, the world will never judge us based on our intent. It'll only judge us based on our actions.
Feature and leverage your partner. And leverage your partner. Have gratitude for your partner. Celebrate your partner. Do everything you can to serve and help and love and support your partner. I think this is the key to happiness and success in the universe is...
Welcome back, everybody, to Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here. I love to have the real, raw conversations with some of the most impactful and influential people on this planet. And it's just amazing when I get the chance to interact with folks and I see that in motion. It wasn't long ago I was introduced to David Newman, and it was instant, the connection that I felt. There was an obvious level of heart. There was an obvious level of presence, and there was a warmth and genuineness to him that was impactful right from the get-go. He's a husband, he's a father, he's a son, but he's also a really impactful business leader at this point. He's got a really cool story and journey that helped him realize his own story and the importance of other people's stories. And today, he really helps amplify that through a whole variety of mediums with a number of folks that have stories worth telling today. But he had to understand his own first and starting to tell his and others, which led to him having a top 1% podcast and being an overall just amazing human being. So David, bro, I'm so happy that you're here with us today.
Hey, Brian, thank you so much. It is genuinely, amazingly great to be here.
Well, I know you and I've shared this a couple of times in the short time we've known each other, but the connection was just pretty much instant. And, you know, coming from somebody who basically does connections for a living, not really, but it seems as if it's so easy coming from Devin Sizemore. And he's an unbelievable person that takes active level to align people with sometimes mutual interest. And you and I even explored that in the beginning. We're like, we don't even know where this is going or why, but it was spot on.
Yeah.
Now, I believe that's because of who you are and very little to do with what you do, even though it is absolutely to do with what you do. And so, you know this question. I asked it to you on my other show, and it's the only one I ask everybody. But outside of however I described you and introduced you, who are you in your own words?
Well, you know, this is why the show is called Flipping the Lid, because you kind of just open up the top, you reach your hand way down in the jar, and you pull out all the good stuff.
Bro, we're just getting started. We just cracked the lid. We haven't even jumped in yet.
We're just going in now. So, my story is the typical, I wish I had someone like me when I started. So I started my corporate career. I did corporate consulting and training for 10 years. Went out on my own, January of 2002. I had no idea. I had no idea about getting clients. I had no idea about marketing, sales, nothing. I struggled mightily to the tune of $40,000 of credit card debt, some really tough conversations with my beautiful bride that I nickname the Hot One. And yes. You know, it's the typical early entrepreneur, honey, are you sure you want to do this? Why don't you go back and get a job? Job is so wonderful. You got the paycheck, you got the benefits, you got the health insurance. Maybe this entrepreneurship thing isn't for you. And I was raised by Eastern European immigrant parents. So my parents are actually Hungarian. They came over in 1956 when the Soviet tanks rolled through Budapest, Hungary. Lifelong corporate employees. Anything they could do to minimize, mitigate, or eliminate risk, they did. And when I entered college thinking I was going to be in the pre-med program, they were thrilled. Oh, our son, the doctor. And then I failed chemistry, physics, and calculus all in the same semester and realized, we're not going to be a doctor. This whole doctor thing's not going to work. And the joke that I make here, Brian, is then just purely for the money-making potential, I switched to being a drama major. Drama. drama and English double major, graduated college, went to graduate school for theater. I actually have an MFA in stage directing. I did professional theater for 4 years in New York City. At the same time, I was teaching at my graduate school. Friend of mine says, "Hey, David, you could do this teaching thing. You seem to be pretty good at it. You could do this for companies. That is called corporate training." So in 1992, that's what started my corporate training career. And I loved it. I had 3 jobs. I had amazing friends, amazing clients, amazing folks that were in my consulting and coaching and training world. 2002, end of 2001, I say, well, how hard can it be? I know how to coach. I know how to train. I know how to consult. And of course, I found out, like every entrepreneur, that when you're on your own, it's not about doing the work. It's about getting the work. And so I literally had such a hard time when I got started. If I had David Newman 2025 at my disposal, David Newman 2002, I would have shaved years and years and hundreds of thousands of dollars off my learning curve. And it's not even a learning curve. We're gonna coin a new term here, Brian. This is a suffering curve. This is a you're too goddamn stubborn for your own good curve, because I had help 7 digits away. There were people that were incredibly generous in my world that said, "Hey, if you ever need anything, just call me. You want to go out for coffee, breakfast, lunch? Who do you need to be introduced to? How can I help you?" And my answer to all of those things back in 2002 and 3 and 4 and 5 was nothing. I'm good. I have it dialed in. I wasn't good. I was terrible. I was suffering. I was struggling. But I had an ego the size of Mount Rushmore. I had to be the hero of my own story. Heroes, now I know better, of course, but back then, heroes don't ask for help. Heroes don't accept help. Heroes don't need to be rescued. And now you and I can have a long, deep conversation about how stupid all those phrases are. But so that was my story, man. I'm doing what I'm doing now to do everything I can possibly do to reach back in time 22, 23 years ago and help the somewhat clueless, somewhat lost, somewhat struggling people who are trying to figure out this whole marketing, sales, and business growth thing. They were accidental entrepreneurs. Like, they didn't get into this to be serial entrepreneurs and SaaS founders and startup rock stars. And these folks are just making their way as a consultant or speaker or coach or trainer or course creator. Never went to business school, don't like sales, was never good at it. And really, they hate the way sales is done to them. So they're very reluctant to pick up the sales toolkit themselves because they don't want to be that guy. They don't want to be that gal that's the high pressure, slimy, pushy, desperate, chasing, persuading, convincing moron. The rest of my answers, by the way, will be shorter.
Well, I was just going to tell you, that's got to be the most epic answer to a who are you question, because I think you packed your whole life, every journey, all these little lessons into like 5.5 minutes, which is like podcasting pro 101. Like, here's the thing. What it also shows is you know your story, the relevant inflection points within your story. Doesn't mean you know all of the elements of your story, but the most relevant, at least, as you've been able to uncover consciously today, yes. Right? You're able to articulate and reflect back the lessons from those stories. And again, as many entrepreneurs, your business really was an approach to be able to create solutions to things that you didn't have in those same times. And again, that's often how we see a lot of these journeys take place. I want to focus a little bit earlier in some of the components that led to this ego and inability to ask for help, right? Because there are elements that exist there that people hear ego and we hear arrogance, but as you and I both know now, it's really rooted in insecurity, typically fear or shame, right? Ego is armor. It's what we put on the outside to show the world that we are capable of something, while we may not want to admit it to ourselves. And so help me understand some of the components that you believe contributed to that early thought process of ego and armor that ultimately left you somewhat disconnected and got you in the front row seat on that ride and curve to suffering.
The thought that's popping in my mind right now is the old saying about if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. I invested so much of my ego in every room I entered. I wanted and needed to be the smartest guy in that room, even though clearly I was not. Clearly, I was not anywhere near any sort of level of financial success. I was surrounded by people smarter than me, kinder than me, more generous than me, more experienced than me. And the ego said, no thanks, I'm going to figure this out. And it was almost like there's this nobility in suffering and struggling and the bootstrap entrepreneur. And, everyone has to figure it out on their own from square one. This is complete nonsense. This is complete nonsense. And in fact, when I think back to my days in big corporate consulting, so I had an office that was it was on the 26th floor, Center City, Philadelphia, big conference center, big training rooms, big event spaces. And a lot of the consulting firms' partners were on that floor because it was nice, right? It was kind of like the show place of the office where all the people would come in from all the other offices and do training and seminars and internal meetings and so forth. So it was an internal conference center. Anyway, so they had an open door policy. They had offices, but the doors were open 90% of the time. And the partner, this was Towers Perrin was the name of the consulting firm.
I'm very familiar with Towers Perrin.
So
used to compete with them.
Benefits consulting, HR consulting, management consulting. Her office door was open 90% of the time. And I could hear her on the phone calling people in our office, calling people in Chicago, calling people in San Francisco, calling people in the Boston office. Hey, can you help me with this? Hey, I need a couple ideas. Hey, she was a master internal networker. She was very, very successful, very ambitious, big climber kind of personality, but she was calling in chips and favors all the time. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this and observing, did I learn from this? I did not. Did I internalize this message that very successful, very ambitious people are constantly leveraging their relationships and also giving of their relationships? So she wasn't just a taker. I would say she was much more of a giver than a taker. But I remember her asking for favors, resources, people, ideas, help. It could be seminar space. It could be, hey, the hotel is sold out. Could you call the general manager for me and arrange blah, 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 blah. So asking for help, calling in chips, calling in favors. This was her stock in trade on a daily basis. I go out on my own, little nebbish goofball solopreneur going, well, I'm going to figure all of this out on my own, Brian. I don't need help. I don't need favors. I don't need assistance. I don't need relationships. I don't need introductions. I don't need connections. I'm going to struggle and suffer on my own because somehow that had some level of nobility to it. And, people sometimes ask me, David, what over your 20 plus year career, what's the number one thing you regret? It is this, that I did not ask for help when it was offered, when it was practically forced on me. Now, people would say, no, really, how can I help you? One of my favorite questions is from my friend David A. Fields. We talk every few months. The last thing he says, last 5 or 6 minutes of each call, okay, before we wrap up, how can I make your life better? How can I make your life better? And just open book, what do you want? What do you need? Now, obviously, when we first started our relationship 10, 15 years ago, what was my stock answer? No, I'm good. How can I help you? No, I'm awesome, right? Now, the last 10, 15 years, well, it's funny you ask. I really could use some help with this. I would love to get on more podcasts. You've done such an amazing job with your book. I would love an endorsement for my new book that's coming out. I would ask him everything and anything that was on my mind. When I didn't have something to ask, I made something up just to exercise that muscle, just so I wouldn't fall back into the habit of no thanks, I'm good, I don't need help. How can I help you? And I think anyone in this sort of advisory, expert business, speaking business, coaching, consulting, mentoring business, we are universally terrible, universally horrible at asking for help because we are professional helpers. So we are much more comfortable in the giving role, in the sharing, in the adding value role. There's a internal allergy. And even as I'm talking about it, I'm very much in touch with it and I got to tamp it down. This is something that I think this is the key to happiness and success in the universe, is getting into the flow of giving and receiving help, giving and receiving ideas, generosity, relationships, connections, prosperity. All of these things are tied to the flow. When you block the flow, and you can block the flow by not giving, more often we block the flow by not receiving. So we can talk about compliments. People say, oh, Brian, that was an amazing keynote. Dude, it totally blew my mind. You are so incredible. I know that you are emotionally intelligent enough to be completely open, be completely gracious, be completely and genuinely receiving of that. Today, I am too, but it used to be, oh, no, it was nothing, right? Mm-hmm. I would take these gifts, I would take these compliments, I would take these massive expressions of gratitude that people would share with me over the years, and I would poo-poo it, I would minimize it, I would diminish it, I would insult it by not accepting it. Imagine someone wraps up a beautiful gift. It's a handmade gift, beautiful paper, ribbon, a beautiful handwritten calligraphy, inscription, and they hand it to you, and you go, no, please, no. And you throw it in the gutter. You throw it down the sewer drain. Yeah. Person's like, whoa, what just happened there? It is the most ungracious thing you can do to blow off a genuine, heartfelt compliment. But how often have we done it? How often have I done it? A lot. And finally, I stopped, and my life got better, and my relationships got better.
We talked about this exact topic on the interview that I had on Friday, which is very interesting, unpacking it. It is obviously a very common pattern with many of us who are, heart-centered impact makers, service providers. And, I appreciate even you sitting here saying like, oh yeah, Brian, you get off stage and now you can fully accept and receive it. Not always. But like you, and I had shared this with the other person, something I put into place a few years back because I realized it was one of my biggest blind spots was asking and receiving, is that when I do get a compliment, right? I used to believe my love language was words of affirmation. Yet every time I was given a compliment, I felt crappier about myself, right? Like every time I did anything major, I would feel less about myself and more isolated. But when I started to get to the place of realizing that this was my block, I'm kind of dense and a little dumb in some ways, David. And I need very physical, visual, tangible reminders, right? And so this was one of them. I recreated my own patterns by whenever anybody gives me a compliment now, I just say, thank you. I fully received that. And I actually verbalize that I'm fully receiving it so that I'm energetically honoring the transition of energy. But, it's interesting because you're right. A lot of these same patterns exist with people that are in service-based spaces. As I hear the early parts of your answer around where did this protection and ego come from? It's hard to not see the same pattern as so many other high performers, myself included, which is that early in life, you learn to receive love, validation, and connection through performance, right? And so it was always contingent upon what you did versus who you were, which meant, of course, you had to prove it to someone, yourself or others, to establish your own level of worth and value. I don't like asking close-ended questions or ones that would necessarily be just too simple of an answer, but it begs me to question, who were you proving it to?
My father.
And who else?
Pretty easy to access that. Thank you, therapy.
And who else, David?
Probably my teachers. So in school,
I was going to say you.
I was a big
I was going to say you.
problem. in school, I was the class clown. I was always in trouble, always at the principal's office, and always done really well with grades and tests, but terrible discipline problem in class. And so I remember this was my high school French teacher in 10th grade. I was very disruptive in French class. I just did not like her. We did not get along. Anyway, calls my parents in for a parent-teacher conference. So it's my parents, the French teacher, and me. And we're sitting there. It's after school. The classroom is empty. And she says, here's what's been happening with David. Here's what's going on, right? David, would you agree? Yes, fine, great. She says, before we get into discussing this, Mr. and Mrs. Newman, I want to tell you, I firmly believe that one day we will be proud of David. My mother chimes in right there, and she says, we're proud of David today.
Yeah.
I still got in trouble. I still got in trouble for being a punk in French class, but at least my mother came to the defense of my professional reputation as a son.
Yeah. Yeah. Do I have permission to reflect something back to you?
Please do.
What I was also seeing in some of that, and part of the reason I was interjecting even right in the beginning is I do believe your father, and yes, therapy helped you find that connection. Yes, there's elements of it that showed up in school, but it happened even long after school. And so where I was seeing it is I believe early on, because of the belief systems you'd created and having to prove it to others, you needed to prove it to yourself before you were willing to drop the armor and ask someone else for help.
Absolutely. The whole self-esteem, self-worth, self-identity of someone who is willing to ask for help, I couldn't connect with that.
Yeah.
That seemed to me completely wrong-headed now. I just have to keep reinforcing this for our listeners. Completely wrong-headed idea that people who ask for help are lacking or diminished or weak or unable or unwilling. I've built my entire life on being a professional helper. So obviously my clients who I love and who go on to do amazing, fantastic, incredible things, they are the opposite of all of these things. So why do I love and respect and so loudly cheer for my clients who are asking for help, receiving help, accelerating on the shoulders of others? That wasn't me early on. I didn't see it. I didn't get it. I didn't avail myself of free help. I didn't avail myself of low-cost help, medium-cost help, or expensive help. I mean, fast forward to the last 5 years, I invest over $150,000 a year every single year, not over the 5 years, but every year, $150K plus events, masterminds, coaches, mentors, groups I belong to, people I hire for certain specialized types of coaching and consulting. I think the most successful people take all the free help that they need and want, and then they invest heavily and mightily and strategically in self-development, professional development, personal development. I mentioned therapy. Thank God for therapy. That's $600 a month. So, I'm counting all of that in my $150K a year. It adds up quick, and I wouldn't take a penny of it back.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate even the focus that you put on the investment that you've made. I have said here in the last periods of time that I'm somebody who over the last decade plus has invested over $750,000 in all of those same types of mentalities, right? And that it is truly an investment that pays some of the greatest rewards that we'll ever have. You are able to see it and talk about it so clearly now. What was the transition point? When did you become aware of this block? And how did you actively start to shift your behavior to asking, receiving, and establishing the network that you've now established that obviously feeds itself?
I think hitting rock bottom can be a really productive exercise.
It can.
So hitting rock bottom professionally, financially. So I mentioned that early on, my wife and I were having money conversations, or more accurately, lack of money conversations. At that time, I went to a therapist also, and it was just me and him. But around this money issue, he says, you should bring Vanessa in. Vanessa's my wife. You should bring Vanessa in. Let's have one session with both of you. So he sits us down. He looks at me. He looks at her. He looks at me. He looks at her. He says, so we've been talking, David and I have been talking about finances, struggles, debt, etc., and that you're not comfortable with the way that he is managing risk and money and whatever. Yes, and so they talk for a little bit. He turns to me and he says, David, at this point, you've been thinking about getting a job. You've been thinking about doubling down on your entrepreneurial business. It really doesn't matter what you do. I was like, okay, where's this going? He says, it really doesn't matter which path you pick. Do you know what your job is? And I was like, didn't really, I hesitated, just long enough for him to then jump in. And this is very uncharacteristic, I think, for therapists, and especially for my therapist. Very rarely directive and prescriptive, but this time it was his moment. He said, it doesn't matter what path you pick. You have one job and one job only. Your job is to take care of your family. Your job is to be a provider. How you do that matters not at all. You want to go back and get a job, 6-figure job, healthcare, benefits, stock options, bonuses, you go do that. You want to go make hundreds of thousands of dollars as an entrepreneur, you go do that. But what you're doing now, what's happening now, is unacceptable. You are not fulfilling your duty as a father, as a husband, as a provider. So when you say, David, what was your turning point? Brian, that was my turning point.
Well, I think it's a pretty significant turning point. I think sometimes it does take someone that we respect on the outside to reflect something back to us that we may not even be seeing, even if everyone else is seeing it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's difficult to receive and surrender to that as well, particularly in some ways when it could be delivered in a way that could almost make you feel defensive, right?
Yes.
Which shows the trust that had been established leading into that point. I said for a long time, and it's similar to your story, a lot of the solutions and the things that we do today and how we help people were things that I wished I'd had at different points in my journey. And that doesn't mean that I didn't have great coaches and therapists and others along my journey, but I didn't have it all in one place. And I've even used the term for a long time, which I've now chosen to stop using, which is that I paid a lot of dummy tax, right? And I've heard you reflect that back multiple times. That's not the way to do things. It was stupid. I don't want others to have to lean into this. And I've gotten to a place myself where I view things not through the lens of success or failure, but are these taking me closer to or further away from who I am and what I want? And what are the lessons that are embedded in them, right? Yeah. Because it's easy to look back on stuff that we've done with the judgment and criticism to say it was stupid, but yet at the same time, you weren't conscious to it at that time, nor did you believe you were stupid, nor were you. And so what I'm curious about in this is, why do you use the language stupid? It was a bad decision. It wasn't the right way. And how do you use that language to frame the lessons that you extracted from it and how you apply it in your life?
It's funny. It's almost, and again, I don't have any personal experience with addiction, alcohol, drugs, etc. But I imagine it's when similar to when you have stopped a very unhealthy habit or a very destructive habit, and you look back on your former self as, wow, I don't know, that was a different person. And now on the other side of it, you realize the toxicity and the damage and the self-harm and the harm to others that you were doing. So you're kind of angry at your former self. Whether that has a therapeutic intervention that's necessary to hold my former self with a little more kindness and empathy and grace and mercy, maybe. It's funny. I think my emotional journey, my journey with things like anger management or depression or so forth, grace, mercy, and surrender are 3 really valuable skills. The definition of mercy is perhaps withholding something from someone when they richly deserve it. Grace is giving something to someone when they absolutely do not deserve it. And then, surrender is just, not getting attached, to a certain outcome, not being so single-minded with result, and realizing that sometimes whatever the process is that you're working towards that result, there's many paths up that mountain. And sometimes you quit or you surrender one path, and there's a much better, much faster path waiting for you in a different angle and a different trajectory.
Yeah. One of the things we've talked a lot about up until now is this idea of awareness and how important it is, right, in shaping our intentional thoughts, our beliefs, our actions, our strategies, all of it. One of the things that I know we both resonate with and know is true is that, and we've even heard it, it's age-old wisdom, right? Thoughts without action are just thoughts, right? Or wasted. It's, I'm a big believer in creating alignment, but if you don't then also have intentional and aligned actions that support that alignment, then you're not really in alignment, right? Because as you've heard me say before, the world will never judge us based on our intent. It'll only judge us based on our actions, right? And so your books are rooted in action, right? It's do it speaking, do it selling, do it podcasting. And it's with this idea of putting action in place to allow those stories to kind of come full circle. Yeah. Obviously, this is a best-selling series. You've focused in a few different mediums, all of which help capture some different form of story and how it gets amplified.
Yeah.
But for someone who says that they couldn't sell out of a paper bag and still doesn't believe in selling, you have a book on selling, right? Which I also know means that there's other elements that we need to redefine there.
That's
probably
right.
The same for speaking and podcasting.
Yeah.
And so help us understand the actions that you are teaching people to take, but ultimately, what are the philosophies behind it that you're teaching that are driving that action into impact?
Sure, absolutely. Well, let's start with the do it selling philosophies. In the first few pages, even in the introduction, I say, this is the sales book for people who hate to sell.
Yes.
This is the sales book for people who have been, they've been sold too badly. They've been trained badly with sales training, and they have just had a lot of battle scars and damage around the sales and the selling process. So what typically happens with those folks is they abdicate and they say, I'll just take whatever business comes in the door, or I'm going to double down, triple down on my inbound strategy. So a whole bunch of people come knocking on my door, and I'm not going to do anything outbound or salesy or pushy or needy or spammy. So one of the insights, one of the principles is, if you think of every sales conversation or even every sales action as the first moment of delivery, this is especially true for professional services firms. So I said, go into every sales call, initial exploratory, hi, how are you? Maybe you can help me, whatever. You meet at a networking event, you get referred, you get introduced, whatever it is. Tell me what's going on. And, let's pretend we're starting our work together. What's the first thing you would ask me? Well, we're having a real hard time with our sales reps are out there and they're not doing this, they're not doing that, or I'm out there, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that. I'm terrible at this. Okay. So I start coaching. I start mentoring, right? This goes against all the sales training that's out there, right? You got to don't spill the candy in the lobby. Don't give away too much information for free. These are all things that we've had programmed in our minds. When I get on an initial conversation with someone, it's usually 30 minutes. I am as helpful as I possibly can in that 30 minutes. And then I say to them, either I'm not out of time and I say, hey, by the way, I know that we're getting close to our time. I'm okay to extend if you are. Oh, I can totally extend. Great. So then we keep talking. If they, oh no, I have a hard stop, I am so sorry. I said, no worries. We just really scratched the surface. Why don't you and I book a second chat and we can take the conversation further? So I always try and have at least 2 helping calls before any commercial intent. Now, think about the dynamic there. Most people want to say, okay, well, you got 3 sales calls on your calendar this week. People go, oh God, I hate those sales calls. Okay, you have 3 helping calls on your calendar this week. Oh, I love helping people. Sure you do. Okay, great. So you helping call number 1, helping call number 2, you're being of good service to this person, whatever they're buying, whatever their problem is. And then at the end of call number 2, you say, based on everything that we've talked about so far, I think there are some ways I can be more formally helpful to you. Would that be worth a short chat? Would you like to book another call to see if and how we might work together? Oh, yeah, David, that would be great. So at that point, they know that next conversation is a sales call. I know that next conversation is a sales call, and they have asked me for a sales call. I'm not pushy. I'm not convincing. I'm not persuading. I'm not chasing. My show rate for the first helping call is 100%. My show rate for the second helping call is 100%. And my show rate for the sales call that they asked for, because I basically asked them, would you like to have a sales call? Not in so many words, but I think they're based on what I've shared with you so far and based on what you've shared with me, there may be some ways I could be more formally helpful to you. Would that be worth another conversation? Yes. Oh my God, please, let's have that conversation. 100%. So I don't know any other strategy that is 100%, 100%, 100% show up rate and a very high closing ratio on that commercial conversation. They don't always buy the biggest, the most expensive, the best thing. Sometimes they take a baby step. Sometimes they take an intermediate step. Once in a while, they do buy the big kahuna. But I've done many, many thousands. I should actually count them because I've got my CRM, but many, many thousands of sales calls, and I'm sure other people have too. The first half of my career, when I did not do it this way, I was Mr. One Call Close, go out there, bite their heads off, get the credit card, go, go, go. I just got so burned out on those kind of sales calls. Now I have between 3 and 5 helping calls a week. I have between 3 and 5 sales calls a week, and I look forward to each and every one. And that's because I am detached from the outcome. My main job, right? So take the sales process. Imagine they had hired you as a consultant. Imagine they hired you as a coach. Imagine they hired you as their keynote speaker. You would show up with a whole bunch of questions. Tell me about your group. Tell me about your meeting. Who comes before me? What else is going on? What's the theme of the meeting? Why is the theme of the meeting the theme of the meeting? Tell me more about the audience. What's going on with the company? What are a couple of pieces of good news that I, as an outsider, could not possibly know about, but you know intimately? What are some pieces of bad news that you know as an insider that I couldn't possibly know as an outsider? What are you hoping will happen once we're done with this consulting, coaching, speaking, training, professional intervention of whatever? So I'm acting as if I'm already hired. When I'm acting as if I'm already hired, I show up curious. I show up with ideas. I show up helpful. I show up generous. I show up giving much more so than taking. And then I'm giving them the experience of what it's like to work with me. I'm not telling them how brilliant I am and how wonderful my ideas are going to be. I am showing them and sharing with them. Yeah. If they want more, they write me a check. If they do not want more, no harm, no foul. I was of excellent service to them in the short time that we were, considering options. And that's selling for people who hate to sell. Yeah. So stop selling, people. Stop selling and start serving, and you will sell an awful lot more.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I'm a big believer that we have got to operate congruent, and we have got to offer value, and to do that consistently. And if we consistently offer value, we don't typically even have to sell. And that is the whole point, right? I really appreciate how you even navigate and discuss some of these things. And you and I share similar language in some of it as well, right? Like detachment and really making sure even how we're setting up expectations and how we're transitioning between meetings. But, you asked me, because you interviewed me on your show not long ago, and it was actually a really interesting question. You might have been the only person who's ever asked me, but then I heard the same language with you. So I want to ask you the same question. What does it mean for you to determine if and how you can help?
What is it? What criteria?
What does it mean for you? Yeah. What does it mean for you to say to determine if and how I can help? Because you used that language a second ago, right? What does if and how mean to you? What's that philosophy mean? Sure. What does it do?
So the first thing I'm looking for, and this is the updated current edition of my answer. It used to be a warm body with a check, Brian. That was like, man, whatever it is, give me your credit card. We are going to Mars.
I'll figure out how to help you. I promise. We'll figure it out along the way.
We'll figure it out. Just give me the credit card. Let's go. So now I need to have a genuine rapport, respect, and like. I have to like this person. If we're not connected on a personal level, there is no professional magic that is going to take someone from a prospect that I'm not really crazy about to a client that I love. So I'm going to take you back 20 plus years. Early on, I was in this workshop, and the workshop, one of the exercises was write down your definition of success. I was completely ill-equipped for this, but here's what came out of my pen. And I still have the notebook. To do work you love, with those you love, and for those you love. That was my definition. And I had like zero entrepreneurial experience at that point, but I thought that was a pretty, that just somehow came out of me from the heavens. I was channeling something. So,
and that was real wisdom, bro. You were channeling some wisdom right there.
I was, but yet that was followed by about 5 or 6 years of any warm body with a check. So it sounded good on paper. I wasn't living it.
Yeah.
And then, you hit these various brick walls and plateaus and dead ends in your business. And you're like, oh, wait a second. What? And it's always been top of mind for me. This do work that you love, with those you love, and for those you love. So when I first started hiring a team, this is back in 2017, that mantra came back once again. That's work with people you love. So I hired a whole bunch of people over the years. The ones that stuck, the ones that were successful, the ones that lasted were the ones that I genuinely had affection, respect, rapport, and connection with. And I don't believe necessarily that a business is a family, but a business is absolutely a team. And you have to have that sort of subconscious, subliminal connection with your teammates where you can finish each other's sentences. You are singing from the same hymnal. You are playing out of the same playbook. So that was the with you love. The for those you love, that was the hardest lesson, because you know how I was beating up myself earlier, my earlier self, my younger self? Well, people would come to me. They don't know marketing. They don't know sales. They don't know positioning, packaging, messaging, differentiation, pricing. Everything is a hot mess disaster. And I looked at these people as less than. I looked at these people as, how dumb can you be? Realizing it, hey, it took me 15 years to figure this crap out, but you should know it right away. So I had some years where I was arrogant. I was trying to be helpful, but I was not at all empathetic. You either get it or you don't. And you and I had conversations about this too, that every business problem is a personal problem in disguise. I was looking at these people as individual sets of business problems, and I was never connecting with the human being underneath.
Yeah.
When I started connecting with the human being underneath and I operationalized the second phrase of my mantra, which is do work you love with those you love, for those you love, I had an incredible turnaround in the quality of people that were coming to me, which was either real or perceived, because I only enrolled people and I only invited people to work with us that I genuinely had a rapport and a connection with. And no connection, no thanks, no sale, put your credit card back in your pocket. And everything went up. So I was also building a community. The community kept getting better and better and better. The people that were just walking credit cards that I did not necessarily like, they fell away naturally. So attrition did its work, natural selection. Thank you, Charles Darwin. The folks that remained, not only were they bonding with me, but you know this from building communities, they started bonding in this incredible way with each other. And now I'm the convener of these awesome, amazing people doing this fantastic work in the world. And they're looking at me like, man, you've built a great community. It's like, no, actually, you built a great community. I'm a good inviter. And now I'm now a really good inviter and I'm a really good selector. But all y'all are building the community. So almost every call now that we have with our online community, our folks, and we do in-person events a couple times a year. At the end of those events, at the end of almost every Zoom call, I say to them, thank you for making this an awesome, amazing, incredible experience. This would not be what it is. This would not mean what it means if each of you were not contributing your heart, your soul, your brilliance, your genius, your generosity. And thank you for making this an awesome, amazing community. So I thank them now. They sometimes thank me, but I thank them more. That is a huge game changer, right? That is a huge, huge game changer. When we get together at these in-person events that we do around the country, people who have never been in the same physical space run across the room and hug each other, and tears are streaming down their face. It's so good to finally meet you. Oh my God. And they have built this amazing bond. So yes, I like them all. I love them all. I'm now even signing off on some of my one-on-one calls. Hey man, I believe in you. I love you. You're doing amazing work.
Yeah.
Like, you don't say that to people who are walking credit cards.
Yeah.
You only say that if you have the privilege of doing work you love with those you love and for those you love.
I fully appreciate everything you're saying. And I have a similar pattern in terms of wanting to reflect consistently back to the folks in our world that it's me being a guide, but that they were the ones that did the work. Right. And,
yes.
And for a long time in my own journey, and I hear even little hints of it in your own, it was also just easier and better for me to just reflect it back, because what I was saying to them wasn't untrue, but it also would prevent me being in a position where I had to fully own the contributions that I made to it.
Right.
And so with this whole concept of receiving, coming back full circle here, what are the elements of the communities that you've built, the impact that you've had, the influence that you've created, that you can fully step into and own with no ego, no need to brag, but just simply as facts of impact?
As far as client success stories?
Or even in the interaction and energy exchange of the relationship.
Sure.
Because I also heard you say, I thank them more than they thank me, almost like you were trying to win. Yeah. Right. And that's not what it is, David. But it's like, okay, right. If that's the measuring stick, then where and how do you allow yourself to receive the gratitude and the recognition of fact of the impact you've created?
Sure. I'm going to give you my very favorite success story, which has nothing to do with sales,
Beautiful.
finance, business,
even
revenue,
better.
Nothing. Last year, a friend of mine who I'd known for 15 years is also a current client. She's getting married. I'm invited to the wedding. They're local. They live about half an hour from here. And, we're all filing in, and I'm looking at the program, and it says officiant, the person who's going to marry them. The officiant has the same name as another one of my clients. And this other client, so we're in Pennsylvania. This other client is in Toronto. I'm like, man, that's a funny coincidence that, guy with the same name as one of my clients is officiating this wedding. We start the processional. We got the couple coming down. The officiant comes up. It's my client. And I'm like, so as soon as they're married, I was like, wait a minute. You met through, and you started. David, we are best friends. We talk every week for years. We met through the community that you put together. They're still both active clients. I said, you never mentioned this to me. So they only invited like a very tiny handful of business folks. It was me and one other person that was in the business realm. Everything else was friends, family, loved ones, whatever. So it was even a huge honor for me to be invited to this thing, to find out that they have built this profound, deep, ongoing, meaningful, incredibly meaningful relationship. So much so that one of my clients says to my other client, hey, would you be wonderful enough to come down and officiate our wedding? We want it to be you. And for him to say, sure, I would love to. It was like, oh my God. So
that's amazing.
I'm still getting a little bit chills here just recounting this story to you. So, that I think is it's
a representation
story.
Yeah, it's a representation. And, so we'll say cheers to that. And that'll lead me right to my next question. What are your top 3 favorite bourbons?
Number 1 is going to be Buffalo Trace, which is easy to find in some parts of the country. Yeah. Tough to find around
Buffalo Trace is a good
Philadelphia. 1792 is also very, very tasty. And then Four Roses Single Barrel. That is also very good. Very delicious.
All right, I'll throw two back at you that are also on my top list, because all 3 of those I agree with. By the way, I don't drink that much anymore, but I love bourbon. Yeah. And we'll still sip on bourbon when it's appropriate. Angel's Envy.
Oh, yes, for sure.
And Michter's Single Barrel.
I've never tried Michter's.
Unreal. Yeah, Michter's has got to be probably in my top 2, honestly.
So the Single Barrel, is that the brown label or the green label?
I think it's the brown label.
Okay.
I think it's the brown label. So I think the green label is their rye, if I'm remembering correctly. So, which the rye is good, but it's not the same as what I enjoy. But anyway, that is awesome. I'm curious, how did bourbon come into your world, and how have you developed your palate?
Well, bourbon came into it's another relationship story. So my friend Corey Perlman, who's a social media marketing agency owner, he's down in Atlanta. We became friends about 15 years ago. I was a Scotch drinker. Not the smoky stuff, but just a nice single malt, Irish whiskey also.
Yeah.
Bourbon, my only exposure to bourbon must have been some really horrible, super strong Elijah Craig, gasoline, high proof, blah, 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 blah. And so we're at this event. This is 2013 or so. And he says, so you don't like bourbon? I'm like, dude, I hate bourbon. I hate it. It's disgusting. It's like drinking gasoline. He says, I think you've been drinking the wrong kind of bourbon. I said, I've only tried it a couple times and I did not like what I tried. He goes, okay, let's go to the bar. I'm going to give you some of my favorites. And so it's like, oh, this is delicious. This is very mellow. This is almost sweet. This is fantastic. He goes, yeah, that's the kind of bourbon I like. I said, well, if this is bourbon, maybe I'll give it a second chance. And so I started going for, some of the milder things. Obviously, Angel's Envy is delicious because it's finished in the ruby casks. The ones that I mentioned also, very smooth on the sweeter side.
All of them are smoother. Yep.
But yeah, even things like Wild Turkey 101, which is kind of high proof, but very tasty, very nicely done. So there are still bourbons that I do not enjoy because they're just too damn strong. I'm not a big Elijah Craig person because most of their stuff is kind of sharp, kind of gasoline-like. But I realized that not all bourbons are the same, and there's a whole different art and spectrum of bourbons. And, little did I know in 2013 that world would blow up the way it has.
Dude, it's crazy. And I will say, I have not had Wild Turkey since college, when we used to take Wild Turkey and 151 and light them on fire before we would take shots of them. Yeah, we did some. I enjoyed myself back then as well. But no, I mean, I actually appreciate that. Have you ventured into mezcals yet?
I have not, but another good friend of mine, Jay Bear, is a tequila aficionado.
Yep. I am now in a place where the mezcal, which has that smoky same presence as a bourbon, a really well-refined, smooth mezcal is going to be my go-to at this point, just because of how it hits. And again, I drink maybe 10 drinks a year at this point, so it's very infrequent. But I'm hoping that when we're together in Pennsylvania for Justin's event, maybe we'll have to share a good bourbon and have some conversation while we're together.
My personal mission now is to ratchet you up to 11 drinks a year.
11 drinks. All right. I might go to 12 for you. You're
All
pretty
right.
special. You're pretty special.
Excellent.
Man, I really appreciate just the transparency, the vulnerability around all of this. I mean, it's a big part of your story is the things that you didn't know and the things that you had to create as a result of it. But what I know that you and I also agree on is there is no final destination, just constant evolution itself. And we're always in this process of either investing in new areas of growth or uncovering unconscious blocks or facing, perceivable biggest problems or patterns within our lives. And so if you had to look right now in terms of like, where are you making an investment? Where are you focusing on creating change and growth? Or where are you working through a problem in your life that is most prevalent right now?
I am working on, I guess the best way to put it is spreading seeds. So this whole concept of give till it hurts, give some more, give with no expectation of any sort of transactional, I'm going to do this so I get that. I'm going to help him so he helps me, and I'm going to help her so she gives me this. And just literally spreading seeds as far and wide as I can. Part of that is through the books. Part of that is through podcast guesting like this, and I appreciate so much being a guest on your show. Part of it is hosting. So even sharing my brilliant friends, in 2011, I came out with this blog post called Why Your Business Needs to Flop. And FLOP was an acronym, F.L.O.P, feature and leverage other people. And the premise of that was that as marketers, as entrepreneurs, people are not tired of hearing from you. They're really not. They're tired of hearing from you about you. They're not. So when I introduce the awesome and amazing Brian Bogert to my audience, they're like, oh my God, I didn't know this guy. This is so cool. I've heard him speak. I've listened to his show. Now David has him on his show. And so literally feature and leverage other people. And I was journaling on this. And so for a long, long time, it was feature and leverage other people. Then I added 4 words. I had to count them. I thought it was 3.
I actually appreciate it. For those of you who are listening to this instead of watching it, I literally saw the pause and the mental gears turning as you were counting. That was amazing. 4 words. What are they?
The 4 words I added. Feature and leverage other people with no commercial intent. For myself, I mean. Yes. With no commercial intent. So when Brian, you're on my show, people go hire you to speak, people want to join your community. That is my goal. My goal is to, and leverage doesn't mean, see, it's funny, right? Words. Leverage means, oh, you're gonna take from them. You're gonna leverage. It's like, no. Feature and leverage people. I'm gonna be the lever. I'm going to be the lever that is pulling people towards my guests and the books that I love and the impactful speakers that I've heard and the other coaches and consultants that I respect. And so, feature is showcase, shine the spotlight on. Leverage is take my platform and support them. And so the biggest pleasure, the biggest joy that I get is when someone comes back to me and says, hey, David, I ended up working with so-and-so. I ended up buying such and such. I ended up grabbing this book. I think you had him on your podcast. I think I heard you talk about him in one of your videos. So I am now the recommender in chief. Back in the early 2000s, the internet was like all about, curation. Curation is the new content. Just, be a pointer outer of cool things. Well, today there's too many cool things to be keeping track of. Cool people. Be the pointer outer of cool people. That is my mission, and that is where I am committed to spreading seeds.
I love the acronym FLOP. I will steal it, but will give credit because I don't mean steal it and make it my own.
Right.
I appreciate the analogy, and I both agree with it, and it aligns with my concept, which is the shift that I made when I started this show. I'd been a guest on so many other shows, and I wanted to be more interested than interesting. I wanted to be able to feature and bring out the best of other people, but it also supports, and I think it's on both sides of this. And I think this is what you teach through the full spectrum of both selling, speaking, podcasting, is that when you feature and leverage other people, when you actually flop, right? When you are consistently adding value in alignment with what we teach, which is relationships, value, and impact in every interaction, allow us to learn how to ethically and scalably leverage other people's platforms, OPPs, right? So I talk about it on the other side of it, which is both sides. Sure. But if you're consistently giving and you've opened yourself to receive, then others want to feature you regularly and consistently as well. Yes. And you have the ability to return that same favor with the audiences that you've built. And that's how this whole concept of marketing and selling and speaking and understanding our stories and operating ethically and detached and with high intent and with abundance, right? And asking for help, this idea of community grounds it all in that answer, because when we can flop, right, it's really about highlighting the brilliance of others. Exactly. As we come to a close on this interview, there's one question that's just pending in my mind, and it has to do with what I think we talked about on the tail end of your last interview. I don't remember the number, but you've been married over 40 years, if I recall.
It's
what's
40
the number
this year. It's exactly
40 this year. Okay.
Yeah.
40 this year. Now, I'm blessed to have parents and in-laws, both of whom have been married for over 40 years. But that's no small feat in and of itself, particularly in the entrepreneurial journey, particularly with some of the early conversations with the therapist and you needing to provide for your family. And so if you look at life and your journey of 40 years of partnership with the focus around relationships, what would be the top lesson or key takeaway through your lens as a husband with everything we've discussed today?
Well, I would say the best, it's almost a version of F.L.O.P, right? So feature and leverage your partner. Feature and leverage your partner. Have gratitude for your partner. Celebrate your partner. Do everything you can to serve and help and love and support your partner. A lot of entrepreneurs say, well, my wife doesn't get me. My wife is, or husband, whatever. My husband is the corporate guy. He doesn't understand. He doesn't appreciate. He doesn't support. He constantly says, I want to go back and get a job. Blah, blah. It's like, okay, well, we need to ramp up the support, love, connection, understanding, empathy, relationship, quotient at home. I mean, we've been talking about doing this with clients and partners and colleagues and friends and podcast guests and podcast hosts. We don't do it often enough at home. Yeah. And when I started doing it regularly and consistently at home, everything improved.
Such wisdom, such gold right there. David, thank you for being with us today, my friend, and sharing all that you have.
I appreciate you, buddy. I love you, and thank you for sharing this time with me.
I appreciate you. And for those of you who just watched David flip his lid, we'll have all of the links to get into his world in the notes. But this is a journey of discovery, a discovery of self, of realizing that people are really the fuel that drives everything in life and in business. That sometimes we need to actually open ourselves and ask for help and learn from the mistakes that we've made by how we can apply them in our lives and shortening the curve to learning for other people. See, a lot of people reach a point where they flop in life. They're completely face down and they're afraid to get back up. But what David just highlighted is the path out is to actually flop, feature and leverage other people, feature and leverage your partners. And when you do that consistently in a giving mentality, impact is inevitable and your income will be secured beyond your desires. But it's going to require you to be honest with yourself, flip open your lid and scan your can.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.